Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity of presenting this research. I'm nor a practitioner I don't practice. I have a background in philosophy, which I'm still practicing today. And I also come from the high fashion industry. So I'll be presenting research that doesn't really cover the entirety of my PhD research, but it still investigates internally sustainable design practices. And it explores the resurgence of an exclusively Japanese technique of patchwork called Boro, which also metonymically induces a stitching technique called sachiko. Although neither historically and technically synonymous, Boro, in both its visual and material logic, presupposes a specific system of techniques. Boro's revival in high fashion also coincides with a broader cultural shift generated by renewed financial, environmental, and authenticity concerns that are exemplified by the rise of secondhand shopping, an increasing focus on archival fashion, and both military and historical garments. Its revival in high fashion also resists the logic of nostalgia-fueled trends and rather engages with a deeper ecological, aesthetic, and philosophical stakes. So basically, the research will explore how garments rooted in subsistence and socio-economic marginality, particularly Boro, can and have been recontextualized in high fashion as tools for critical reflection and sustainable imagination. I'd like to note also that the Boro scholarship is very limited and often reduced to craft manual, online commentary, or like exhibition catalogs. And notable exceptions will include Dr. Laren's Lee in-depth PhD thesis, which I was very lucky to talk with during this research. Boro is also still rarely examined through the lens of design practice as a source of conceptual and material intelligence in fashion. So that's a bit of the research that I've been doing on Boro. And I'd like to also draw on specific fields of philosophy and research as a methodology. So drawing on object-oriented ontology, especially Morton's concept of withdrawn object, we can read Boro as a materially and temporally layered garment embodying resilience and historical memory. Boro also exemplifies an ecology of repair where damage becomes meaning, and it also aligns with philosophers Emanuele Coccia ontology of garments and garments as ontological vessels, as well as Muntean's idea of sartorial memory. Drawing also on Yuriko Saito's everyday aesthetic, the study frames Boro as a material practice rooted in care and generational craft. And while focusing on Japanese designers like Yoji Yamamoto, Rei Kawakubo, or Junya Watanabe, we will resist essentializing Japanese designs and try to emphasize also the connecting points of these designers, but the individuality and originality of their practice. Finally, we'll try to challenge Llewellyn Negrin's critique of poverty chic by highlighting Boro's design intelligence and its philosophical depths beyond aesthetic posturing. So a little bit about Boro. Boro emerged, so the term actually refers to both the condition of wear, as in the phrase boro boro in Japanese, which means that something is extensively worn, torn, and very used. And it also refers to a class of textile extensively mended and patched. It emerged during the Edo period in the rural Tohoku region, which is located in northeast Japan, where actually harsh winters and fiber scarcity shaped the clothing practices. Farmers were restricted to hemp and ramie until cotton became more available in the 18th century, and particularly also more cultivated in warmer regions of Japan. So what happened historically, and that is very interesting to notice, is that Boro also emerged through the construction of the Kitamae-bune maritime trade routes and some governmental decision to increase circularity. So people from the Tohoku region gained access to secondhand garments, which they mended repeatedly and repaired extensively until the garments actually far outlive its expected lifespan. The repairs were stitched using sachiko. So I'm just going to show you. So sachiko is a running stitch technique that reinforces garments by actually layering different types of clothes, and it can also be used in quilts. And even though often linked to sachiko, sachiko is not derived from Boro. It serves both as a decorative and structural purposes, and it also varied aesthetically across the Tohoku region in terms of thread, colors, and motifs. So what you're seeing right here are Boro, and then below is like sachiko. And apologies for this little caption, which apparently there's been a bug. And so what's also very significant about Boro is that the technique is deeply rooted in collective and intergenerational knowledge. It was largely practiced by women indoors during winter because the wintertime was less favorable to agriculture. And as Wada, especially Son Boro, explains, most of the Boro pieces were cut from standardized tan fabrics and assembled geometrically without shaping cuts, which made the garment easy to dismantle and also reconfigure. To understand Boro's shift from necessity to the becoming of Boro as an aesthetic object, we have to consider the Mingei movement, which was founded by Yanagi Soetsu in the 1920s. The Mingei movement celebrates anonymous everyday craft in Japan, and it provided a framework through which Boro could be reinterpreted as art. During my exchange with Laren Lee, she actually noted that this romantic framing often really obscures the poverty and hardship that shaped the practice. But several exhibitions also contributed to moving Boro from a survival craft to a conceptual practice supported by the Japanese environmental philosophy of mottainai, which is regret over waste. The institutional and cultural reevaluation, as well as the artification of Boro, has opened the door to its use in high fashion as a methodological and critical dispositive. Boro offers a compelling model for rethinking design innovation as a continuity rather than disruption. Its repeated gesture of cutting, stitching, layering are not random, but also follow a specific logic that anticipates wear, making each piece a living palimpsest in a way. It also mobilizes multiple craft techniques like sachiko, sakiori, zenshi-ori, or aizome, forming both an archaeology of technique and a tactile memory system. So here you have examples of all of the techniques that are mobilized. And these manual acts are also mostly performed by women and encode familiar and transgenerational memory into the garment surface. Lee also notes that details like red thread, as you've seen before, or hidden lining also reflect intuitive design choices rooted in aesthetic concerns at the time Boro emerged. And it kind of allows us to understand Boro as functioning as an epistemological tool when we reinterpret it in today's time. And I'll be, again, mentioning Tim Ingalls, as I think we all love him here. But Boro also answers this art of inquiry that is formulated by Ingalls. It also exemplifies how design can be anchored in material engagement and sensory awareness. Its revival then should be understood not as surface imitation, but as a methodological proposition in high fashion, as a way to reconnect design, memory, and material ethics. At the outset of the research, it was very important for me to ground the methodology through first-hand accounts. So we spoke with a now friend of mine, but Japanese fashion designer Takuya Nishibori, who actually emphasized Boro's complex presence in contemporary Japan. It's not always materially visible. It's still culturally embedded in folk tales, for instance, or animes. And he also noted that Boro still evokes poverty, but it's still, it actually functions today as an intentional design gesture, which demands balance, skill, and conceptual clarity. For his graduation collection, for instance, he referenced Boro, and he's used Boro and sachiko as connective tools and connective elements in a jacquard knit that you can see here. as he was referencing Japanese yokai. So yokai are objects gaining spirits after extended use. And he connected that to his own thrifting experience in Florence as he was studying in Polymoda. He explored how erosion and repair become storytelling tools in fashion design. No, still not, sorry. The file is very, very big, so it bugs a bit. The research also draws on several case studies, and I think it's also very important yet to note that most of the designers, so Watanabe, Yamamoto, and Kawakubo, were born and raised during the Showa era in Japan, which is the post-war era, and it actually really influenced their design practice. And though Boro was quite absent of their designs in the early stages of their career, it suddenly reappeared in the 2010. So I will argue that the adoption of Boro in high fashion goes beyond surface aesthetics, and it signals deeper design commitment, so long-term principles, expanding material and technical possibilities. This revival is not incidental. It also stems from the democratization of the Mingei movement, the artification of craft in Japan, and several governmental policies that tended to homogenize Japanese design. So originally a pattern maker, Junya Watanabe is often referred as a patchwork designer, though the term doesn't really capture the essence of his work. And what's very interesting, so I went to a Comme des Garçons sample cells, and there were several pieces, which you can see the tag of one here. And so that's the tag of a Boro piece that's going to be shown after. And it mentions something real, something that has history, and something that has a traditional shape, a way of originality, a new feeling for basic. Watanabe's practice is very influenced by the Japanese concept of honmono, which means authenticity, and that is exemplified perfectly in the tag of the garment. So in his fall-winter 2015, according to Tim Blanks, fashion commentator for Vogue, he brought Boro back home with a collection built on traditional Japanese patchwork, celebrating the figure of the humble working man. And still innovating formally through tailored suits, the revival of camellia motifs also, and as well like rockabilly wigs, contrasting with either indigo rags or flip-flops. So it's kind of a melting pot of influences. Also reviving the Japanese Americana, and showcasing how Boro is also a bridge between cultures. I think what's also very interesting is that he goes beyond the tan, so the rectangle shape, by formally innovating with, for instance, circular pockets, and also adding machine stitching elements to sachiko. Ethical concerns can also be raised in his spring-summer 2016 when he's working on Africana patchwork. There's no black model in the show. There are only white people, and some of them have dreads. But he tried, so the intention of the show was to mix Boro with other culturally and historically situated patterns. And same goes for his fall-winter 2019. Boro actually becomes a tool for emotional storytelling. It evokes childhood, dolls, collage. And for the menswear, he's working more on the image of a mature man and older man with tailored casual wear. So through all of this, what's I think interesting in Watanabe's work is that he uses Boro, like cotton, denim, asymmetry to showcase how Boro is also a living method of construction and of adaptation, and it bridges also traditional haute couture or high fashion shapes with streetwear. Other designers will include Yoji Yamamoto, who's very, I think, well known for his aesthetic of resistance and who's anti-Japanese essentialization. So he says that we're not souvenir designers. And Boro is not very present in all of his collections, but it kind of appears as a motif, and it's very prevalent in his diffusion line called Sight. So he uses the technique of applique to ensure timelessness and also authenticity. And for Comme des Garçons, Rei Kawakubo only mobilized Boro once in her collection Adult Delinquent. And the collection was not really essentially about patchwork, but as using patchwork as a method of rupture to disturb bodily continuity and fashion norms. So the collection is entitled Adult Delinquent, so it's a tool for rebellion to disrupt the adult's maturity with unruly forms. And the garments also propose anonymous, ageless, and non-conforming garments as bodies. And to be a little quicker, Capital is, I think, the most well-known brand in terms of Boro, which actually actively contributes to the revival of the practice and collaborated with Kim Jones for Louis Vuitton for the Spring-Summer 2013, and is still collaborating with a lot of high fashion brands. And one of the most notable, also, I think, and most interesting case study would be the fashion brand Kuon, who defined Boro both as a craft revival and innovative method. So Kuon partners with women affected by the 2011 tsunami via a program called Otsushi Sachiko Project, which so it's Sachiko experts who patch and actually perform Boro on the garments. And also Kuon's ranges include vintage Boro that can approximate 8 to 12K in terms of pricing, with detailed provenance and method of care. Contemporary Boro, but also digitally printed Boro, extending its visual language and trying to preserve the visual aesthetic of Boro through time. And Boro in high fashion, as well as other practices, often reduced to poverty aesthetic. So that is a critic saying that distressed clothing actually soothes elite anxiety. Although, yeah, it can be true in many cases and with many designers, it also ignores the designer's own subcultural, conceptual, and philosophical intention. The term poverty aesthetic was coined by Harold Koda in 1983 around Kawakubo's early shows in Paris. And he actually, at this moment, positioned her practice within Zen and Wabi-Sabi, not about poverty, but mostly about embracing impermanence. There's some gestures of resistance, as loosening the screws of the machine in Kawakubo's work, that also works as this manifestation of human error and presence. So I think, to me, that Boro reflects a shift towards value through process. It rejects polished perfection in favor of material memory and temporal layering. In high fashion, it also still carries a geocultural narratives and also new meanings of transmission, conservation, and craft resilience. There's still, one of the questions I'm still thinking about and still asking myself is regarding reselling of the Boro garment in high fashion, on high fashion platforms such as Grailed or Vinted and Vestiaire Collective. In a way, the garments are preserved and kind of in a pristine condition. And some of them have been a bit used and even patched or mended, but it drastically reduces the price of the reselling process. So this is still a question that I'm wondering about. But ultimately, I think that what's very interesting in the case study of Boro is this notion of enclosed ecologies. So beyond repair or aesthetics, Boro reveals internal ecologies, so a self-sustaining system arising from the garment's own use, wear, and transformation, rather than imposing an imposed form. Boro emerges through correspondence with material. In object-oriented ontology, for instance, we will say that garments aren't inert, but active sites of relation between time, touch, memory, and also wearer and designer. Sachiko stitches anticipate damage and garment grow quasi-organically, not by trend, and mending binds the fabric, the body, and the environment. The skills are passed on, and for this reason, and there's an active concern for preservation and skill transmission. So we can distinguish actual Boro, which is the historical or vintage Boro that is frayed and time-worn, and potential Boro, that is the Boro that we can see in high fashion instances, where the technique, the gestures, and the processes are anticipating the final results or visual aspect of Boro. I think that it's also very interesting to work on an exclusively Japanese designer corpus and to note that most oftentimes when Boro is quoted or used in high fashion instances, it's only and solely through collaborations with Japanese designers who actually create and produce the textile with Japanese crafts women. So its emergence in crisis zones like Tohoku, for instance, show how garments can adapt, carry history, and build culture. Finally, I think that Boro has a lot of... sorry. So I'm missing one slide. It's fine. So I think that Boro has a lot of offers a lot of pedagogical perspectives in terms of fashion design education. It draws the focus from invention to attention, not as creating something new, but maybe also sustaining something that already exists. It helps us rethink waste and overproduction, but also the reevaluation of scraps as potentials and not excess. How we can reuse scraps of fabrics for other garments, other looks, but also for padding and quilting, for instance. There's also the vintage processing that gives new garments the aura of time, but also help to engage the wearers in imaginative care and to perform care on their garments. I'm still considering how we can use Boro as this, methodological framework in studios. And I think this can be effectively done through, cultural activations with artists, for instance, or by also working on furniture design, as many brands do nowadays. So to conclude, because I think I'm over time, Boro's presence in high fashion is not really surface level poverty chic. It also helps activating deeper ecology of repair, enclosed ecologies, and also stimulates the active relationship that we have with our garments. A lot of Boro wearers and owners live through the garments, and they tend to achieve this result. But they also, when I was communicating with some resellers, they also have adapted this technique to other types of garments that do not correspond to the visual aesthetics of Boro. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. Sorry. Anybody have questions? No.
Yeah, thank you. I know that this isn't the focus of your PhD, but still I was wondering if there's some history behind the patterns again. That's what interests me, I guess. Do they mean something? Do you use one pattern for one particular type of aim, or?
No. It was a very spontaneous process when it emerged, and it was mostly concerned with mending. There's no. So in Western fashion design, I'm not an expert so far on that, but there's a lot of curves and so on. For instance, the kimono is mostly rectangles. And it's very easy to assemble and disassemble, specifically the color. If you have, for instance, if there's a matsuri, which is like a celebration in the summertime, you change the color of the kimono for the matsuri. So it's very functional. It's mostly in sachiko or also like other techniques of dyeing that you will find culturally relevant patterns. Boro was more of a mending process. According to everything that I've found, it's mostly about patching and mending.
Thank you. That was so extensive and so in-depth. Really, really fascinating. It just brings to mind the other cultures that use this as the Kantha stitch in India, which I'm obsessed with. So it's the reuse of the sari into these extraordinary quilts. And that, to Eva's question, kind of, it's got nothing to do with the Boro, but it kind of speaks into this extraordinarily crazy combination of kind of sari patterns that you'd never put together. So, yeah, I'm always fascinated with the parallels of other cultures. Is there, apart from the Kantha stitch, in your sort of search, are there other cultures that are kind of similar to this?
Yeah, so I think what makes the specificity of Boro and in the way that it has been studied is that it comes from farmers. It's exclusive to the rural class. There's the patchworking technique can be traced also and found in higher classes of the Edo period Japan. And the parallel between, Indian textiles and also Chinese textile practices is often made. I think there are several instances. For instance, where I come from in Algeria, there are similar things of patching, but the aesthetic is much different. And I think that what is interesting in Boro is how it connects a lot of different techniques, and also is very it's a scarcity-based practice. So its mode of emergence is rather about making something out of scratch and trying to survive through it, and padding and adding layers and quilting it and so on and so forth. Rather than actually, like the fabric itself emerged after the process was meant. So there was no aesthetic concerns, but there's a lot of comparative studies, and there's also an article I can share with you made by it's 3 Indian scholars who work on Boro but adapt it to Indian patterns, which,
Anybody? Okay, sorry.
Thank you. A fascinating presentation, and I apologise for what I'm going to ask, but could you flip back to your Ingold slide, because I couldn't get a picture quick enough?
Sure.
Thank you.
Where is it? Is it this one or?
No, go back.
Yeah. Oh. So it's a bit slow. Up. That's it? Okay, yeah. It's, ooh, sorry. Oh. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can send it to you if you want afterwards. Because I think it's,
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I had a question, like you showed us some example of creators, Western creators, inspired by other cultural tradition. I wondered if you think that Western consumers that Boro in Japanese fashion can have an impact on how Western consumers see repair and like emotional connection to clothes.
I think it's it goes beyond Boro, but there's the fascination and fantasies, and I don't have any terms to actually explain that, but the deep fascination that the Western consumers have for Japanese designer is very intense. When you encounter some of Yamamoto's work, so there's this whole consolidation of vintage high fashion, and especially Japanese designers' fashion, as archive fashion, where everything can be archive. It also englobes and incorporates some Western designers like the Antwerp Six and so on, but it's avant-garde fashion, anti-fashion. This has reached a certain status where the reselling process and the reselling cost is very, very expensive. Everything is in pristine condition, and like what I find in my personal experience as both a buyer, a wearer, and a theoretician is that, yeah, the garments are quite mended, and if there's a hole, yeah, nobody's going to want to buy it for the price you want to sell it, but you do actually practice and have a lot of care for the garment. Okay. There's instances where people just buy to resell, but it kind of stimulates something that we don't have with some Western designers.
Okay, so it means that even if it's pricey, everybody can be interested in, like, can be touched in their way, right?
I think, yeah, and also with TikTok and Instagram and so on now, a lot of people are gaining access to anti-fashion, more than fashion, because fashion has always been kind of inaccessible, but very prevalent. But like this avant-garde techniques and anti-fashion practices of fashion were kind of frowned upon before. People were like, oh, I don't understand, it's ugly. Now it's trendy and it's cool. So yeah, I think a lot of people who didn't have access or grew up in a fashion environment are really interested in those designers now.
Okay, thank you.
There is more question? No? I have one question. Sorry. You say that's an aesthetic of poor people at the beginning. Now it's for more rich people because that's higher fashion. Did people from countryside are using this technique now? Because
no, there's been several attempts to erase Boro from Japanese history, as many attempts to erase Japan's poverty and scarcity eras. When it got, there's this economic miracle at the end of the, late 80s, 90s, and so on. So there were active governmental policies that tried to bring to the West Japanese design and the art of craft and all of that to also showcase how polished it was. Scarcity and poverty is very frowned upon in Japan, even still today. When I go there, it's like to have a hole in your garment. If it's a designer garment, it's fine. If it's not, then it's very frowned upon. So farmers and poor people don't really do it, but mending as a practice and repairing garments is it's still very present in the Japanese society. Mostly, I think, because they have the infrastructures for care, like dry cleaners, reparation, cobblers, and so on. It costs nothing there, and crafts is very valued in the society, so people tend to care more. So it's, there's a double standard that cannot be fully, but yeah.